All right. Good afternoon. and Thank you all for joining Childcare Aware of Minnesota for today's Tell Talk, part two of Heart Centered Leadership with Kristen Wheeler Highland, Training, Licensing, Compliance, and Childcare Partner Support Coordinator at Community Action Partnership of Ramsey and Washington Counties. Tell Talks, or Topics for Early Learning Leaders, are monthly webinars for early childhood program leaders to facilitate solutions-focused discussions for your questions about the early childhood field in Minnesota. These one-hour webinars do not meet the standards for a formal professional development training, and participants will not receive a certificate of completion. Tell Talks are designed as a community building opportunity for leaders to engage and share ideas surrounding a specific content area. We're excited to have moved Tell Talks to Zoom in an effort to build community and enhance conversations around our topics. The Tell Talks team consists of Nikki Lepowski, Quality Improvement Coordinator, and myself, Christy Berg, Workforce Advising Coordinator. Together, we work with Corey Woosley and Katie Hoffman at Childcare Aware to coordinate Tell Talks. Some of our previous topics have included Behavior is Communication, a panel discussion on supporting children and their teachers, and telling the story of early childhood development. In September, Linda Kopecki from the Minnesota Breastfeeding Coalition will join us with information related to her program. Please visit the career advancement page of our website to view previously recorded Tell Talks. After today's presentation, you will receive an email from me with the PowerPoint slides along with any resources shared. Childcare Aware of Minnesota is a resource and referral network for early childhood education in the state. We assist families in finding a quality childcare program. We support the professional growth of early childhood educators with professional development opportunities, eager to learn online training, grants, parent aware, and scholarships. We keep the community informed on the importance of quality childcare. Childcare Information Services is a department within CCA that specializes in statewide information sharing and assisting families who are looking for childcare. CCIS sends a welcome packet to new programs, and every 3 years they survey programs about their business policies and tuition rates. The rates are confidential and can influence CCAP reimbursement rates. CICC receives calls from program leaders across Minnesota with general business questions and can route you to the appropriate person to contact. Childcare Aware partners with Center for Inclusive Childcare, which provides free relationship-based professional development, including support, modeling, and resources to childcare programs throughout Minnesota. A coach will spend time with your program, providing support, focusing on the successful inclusion of children with challenging behaviors or special needs, implementing health and safety best practices, and/or supporting the unique needs of toddlers and infants in your care. Achieve, the Minnesota Center for Professional Development, supports individual, trainer, and RBPD membership applicants and approves courses and training events. The Achieve MNCPD website has several resources to share, including a job board, policy info, membership help, info on how to track down your high school diploma, and a virtual career guide. Visit www.mncpd.org to see more. The Tell Talks team partners with several organizations to offer coordinated resources surrounding early care and education needs. As always, participants of Tell Talks are highly encouraged to discuss today's topic with us. You can use the chat box, or we can take you off of mute to comment or ask any questions today. So please feel free to engage with us at any time. And we will be recording the conversation in the main room of the Tell Talk. Conversations taking place in any breakout rooms will not be recorded. And now I'm excited to turn it over to our presenter, Kristen Wheeler Highland. Thank you for being with us today for part two of Heart-Centered Leadership. And you are muted, Kristen.
Yeah, okay. Off to a great start. So Thank you for that. And I just wanted to double check really quick as I get ready to launch in. Is everybody able to see my PowerPoint? All right, perfect. Perfect. So as I'm looking here at everybody, because I'm peeking at you, how many of you were here in the July session? Well, yeah, you too. All right, do we have? Okay.
Maybe no one.
Well, Linda said she watched the recording. All right, perfect. Well, it doesn't matter one way or the other. I just wanted to kind of get a feel for where we are at with everything that's happening today. So this is a part 2, but it's also a standalone session all about heart-centered leadership. And so I want to go ahead and dive us right in. So at the end of our last session that we had, I gave those of you that were here an assignment to reflect on a fear that they have. And I shared in that session that fear is an acronym for false evidence appearing real. And today, I learned that many years ago. And as a matter of fact, I learned that through some therapy that I was going through at the time. And I kept running into my imposter syndrome and things like that. And one of the things that they kept telling me was this acronym for fear. And so I knew that it was false evidence appearing real. And I learned a long time ago about that. But what I have learned since then is that another great acronym for fear is face everything and rise. The idea that rather than letting it get in our way, we can do this. Christy, I know you will appreciate this, that the other one is if you search for the acronym for fear, the other one is face everything and run. So I know you would appreciate that. Not me, but you would. So I like that, but face everything and rise, I think has a completely different feel to it, right? Not only is it false evidence appearing real, but we can face everything and move on, go on. So the other thing that I wanted to talk about a little bit about when we take time is that if we really stop and think about it, as this says, everything that we want is on the other side of fear. The problem with fear is when we let it stand in our way. When whatever it is has decided to be so big in our lives that we're allowing that to stand in our way. And the more we take the time to articulate what those fears are, more we drag them out into the light of day, examine them and respond to them, the easier this gets. I also understand you might want to start with the little ones and work up to a couple of the big ones. You might not want to go for, well, this is my biggest fear, let's tackle that one first. I don't know, although maybe that's a great approach. Maybe if you tackle the biggest one, everything else after that will just fall down. I'm not sure how that works for everybody. So I think that that's a very personalized approach that you can take when it comes to these things. So I just wanted to start with that and have that conversation, because one of the big things that happens to us as leaders is that we run into our own fears quite a bit. And it gets in our way. We're afraid of how we look. We're afraid of how we appear to others. We're afraid that because we were told something somewhere along the way. And this particular topic is taking the time to sort of turn that upside down on its head a little bit. So let's start here. How many of you were raised or have been told that showing any emotions, having too many feelings, being emotional or appearing emotional is a sign of weakness? How many of you have been told that it's because you're a woman that happens? Okay. And if you haven't been told that, if you haven't been acclimated that way, you were fortunate, because especially I was just saying to Christy and Nikki, I've been around so long that when we started in this business, it's why women were the leaders, was because no self-respecting man would be. Because it took, it was like something about being a woman and being weaker or whatever we wanted to put on that did this job. And so it's interesting to think about when we think about leadership. And if you think about leadership in the larger community, do people take women who show their emotions seriously? Are they taken seriously? Or are there sometimes things that people have to say? And so how many of us have had a fear or shied away from doing something because we're afraid we're going to sort of step in it? Right? For some of us, and for many years, we were taught not to be too emotional. We were judged as weak if we showed our emotions. Or if we talked about squishy things, or the idea of leading from the heart, leading with the heart in mind, never mind suggesting heart-centered leadership, that we're going to center our leadership around heart. And so I've been thinking about this. And so what if all of the time that we're busy being afraid of maybe leading from the heart or using heart-centered using heart-centered leadership, the whole time that we're busy being afraid of it, we're expected to be on the receiving end of all of the messy emotions that families bring to us, that staff bring to us. So the idea is we're not supposed to have our own, but we're supposed to have all the answers, and we're supposed to have it all together, and we're supposed to deal with everybody else's. Right? It's kind of an interesting thing to think about. And I'm going to tell you that I personally believe that there's a lot of power in jumping in. I believe that there's a whole lot of power in the squishy. And I ran across this picture, and some of you will know, as soon as I tell you, will know whose children these are. I asked and got permission to use this photo. This is Dana Ellingson's children. And she posted this picture. And I thought, this is a perfect representation of having the freedom to jump in, get messy. And to me, some of the mud that I think of that these kids are obviously doing a great job of playing in is emotions. We sometimes have to wade in and get messy with emotions and get in there. And part of it is for a lot of us because it feels icky or yucky, or we're afraid that if we do that, people won't take us seriously or aren't going to see us the way we want to be seen. And I'm going to tell you that there's power in this. And I'm going to convince you, hopefully. If you weren't convinced coming in, I'm hoping that you will be convinced by the time we're done today to think more about this heart-centered approach, and maybe even being a little squishy by the time we're done. Now, I'm also not going to tell you that you have to do it alone. You definitely don't need to do it alone. There is power in groups. There's power in community. And prior to this, and many of you know and have heard this, Hopkins Early Learning Center had to make the hard decision after 45 years in the business to close their doors. And I say that because Jamie Bonzak, who is my friend, got a hold of me and said, I have to close down. Well, actually, she didn't even tell me what she was doing. She just called me and said, I need help. I need somebody who's going to be willing to get into the yuck with me. Will you get into the yuck with me? And my response was, yeah. And she's like, but I didn't even tell you what it is. It's like, it doesn't matter. It didn't matter to me what the yuck was going to be. Number one, she's my friend. Number two, I admire her and respect her deeply. So if she asked me to join her in the yuck, I was going. And it turned out that the board was in the process of making the decision that they had to close the doors after 45 years. So I went in and spent months with her helping to close the program. I was way behind the scenes because it's her program, but I did some of the yucky stuff. I was in the yuck with her. And so I am here to say, and I'm not saying that everybody just call in a partner when you have to do something yucky, icky like that. But I'm saying she was smart enough to know that she needed not only the physical support, but the emotional support of having to do what she was going to do. And I believe that when we're facing these things and making alterations and changes in a positive way, you might also want some support. So community can be powerful. And our community in particular is quick to jump in and help and support. So I want to step in. The last time we talked about a couple of the principles of heart-centered, and I'm going to pick up with another one. And all that conversation that I just had, all the stuff I just blah, blah, blah at you, leads to this concept that I want you to think about this concept that our heart or emotions are creating weakness. We're putting that to rest. We're all done with that. There is more and more research and more writing that's been done about the need to utilize not just our head, but our heart in service. And especially if you want to be the most effective leader that you can be, that it's going to take your head and it's going to take your heart. So one of the first principles that we're going to take a peek at today is, can you believe in your own strength of heart? Believing in your own strength of heart. So I'm going to give you about 45 seconds or a minute to reflect. And oh, I know what I didn't do, you guys. Oh, you guys, I'm so bad. I'm sorry. I am going to throw right here. There, I just put a link into the chat box. That goes to a handout that I made for today. Now, let me just say this. The majority of the handout gives you space to write in response to the reflection. I give you some additional reflection questions that I'm not going to ask you, but I want you to ponder. Also in that handout, there's an entire page of resources at the back. And then I gave you guys a list of 21 things called "You Might Be a Heart-Centered Leader If." So it's a great one. We don't need, the first page is all about note taking and reflection. So we'll just keep moving. You're welcome to click on the link and look at the handout, print the handout. If you can do that while you're sitting here, that's great. But here's what I want you to do. I want you to start with this reflection. Like I said, I'm going to give you about 45 seconds or a minute to just think about this question. What does it mean to you to believe in your own strength of heart? What does that mean to you? All right, I could give you more time, but I'm gonna keep us moving today. So does anybody want to share, anybody willing to share, to unmute yourself and let us hear your voice and share some words or ideas or phrases that came to mind when you think about this?
Kristen, I'll share. I always think of that old thing that, I mean, you hear about all the time, your heart's a muscle. So you have to practice using it more. And so when you're thinking, or when I was thinking and reflecting on what does it mean for me to believe in my own strength of heart, it's something I have to practice using, and I have to exercise that to make it strong. So it kind of sounds cliche, but that's what I was thinking.
I can share too. I wrote down, I was able to open the link that you shared, Kristen, as a Google Doc. So I'm able to type while we listen, but to think or know that I have what it takes to come into situations with integrity, honesty, courage, and compassion.
I just was thinking to trust that what I have is enough.
Mm.
And Linda wrote in the chat, being confident in myself and my ability to help others.
Those are all wonderful ways to believe in yourself and to believe in your own strength of heart. And I hazard a guess that this is going to stay with you. You're going to continue to think of this and to think of other additional things as we go, which is great. Grab them, write them down, because we need our own sets of affirmations on our way too. And one of the things that we know is that heart-centeredness is no longer being judged as a weakness, but instead it's looked at as a source of strength. And there's a new understanding that is coming into being and awareness as leaders are increasingly embracing the fact that their effectiveness is grounded in the strong relationship with self. Let me say that again. We have to recognize that our effectiveness is grounded in a strong relationship with ourself before we can talk about anybody else. So to that end, I'm going to throw a bunch of questions at you to just contemplate. Have you slowed down to listen to yourself lately? Have you asked yourself about your dreams or goals? Have you asked yourself recently about your desires? And watch out, I'm going to say it. Are you taking good care of yourself? How can we believe in our own strength of heart if we're not listening to ourselves and if we're not taking care of ourselves? It becomes more difficult to do those things when we're not taking care of ourselves first. You know, the old adage that they say on the airplanes, what are you supposed to do with the oxygen mask? Put your own on first, because otherwise you're of no good to anybody else, right? But in leadership, we forget that. Because again, it goes back to that basic thing about we are so busy absorbing that we're not busy taking care of. And we need to do a good job of taking care of. So, just something to be thinking about. And so the this value, this characteristic of heart-centered leadership is that it's vitally important that you believe in the deep value, the very deep value of your own strength of heart. And I put two things on here. On the right-hand side, you see this quote from Deb Crow. Leadership is honoring your connection with people. Number one, I love this particular image, but the other thing is, at the end of the handout, you will find the link to Deb Crow. She runs a podcast called Heart-Centered Leadership. And as a matter of fact, it's called Imperfect. And so she has 2 podcasts and a whole bunch of stuff on her website. So I linked to that at the end of the handout for you. And then on the left, I wanted you to see this one. I love this logo as well. And this is for the Heart-Centered Leadership Foundation. Now, the Heart-Centered Leadership Foundation is working with young people to start to help them to connect so that they are effectively beginning to think about and understand leadership through this connection of heart-centered, which I think is amazing. Like, let's start there, right? So the next generation of people can come up with something slightly different than what we are doing right now and what we were raised to believe. So I wanted to give you both of those right there. So once we as heart-centered leaders have these first 3 things, are the first 2 are the ones that we really talked about in the first session in July, is that once we've come to accept our own realness And we've learned to choose love over fear more often. And we are starting to do what we were just talking about, to come to believe deeply in our own strength of heart. Then we're ready to take the next step, which is to believe in everyone's strength of heart. Believe in everyone's strength of heart. And then we're ready to support others in doing that, right? If we can believe in our own strength of heart, then we can begin to support other people in believing in their own strength of heart. And I don't remember when I heard the quote that's on the screen, but I heard it a long time ago and it has resonated with me a long time, is the longest journey you'll ever take is from the head to the heart. And what the meaning behind that quote is, we can't always just think our way out of it. And frankly, I've said this a couple times in the last couple of weeks. When I was going through therapy, that's what my therapist said to me a lot. She's like, if you could have thought your way out of this, you would have already. You would have thought your way out of it. She's like, there's nothing wrong with your brain. You have just created such a barricade between your brain and your heart. And we have to start breaking that down. I'll tell you what, I was scared to death because of everything that was happening. I was so scared that if I let my heart out, that there was going to be big problems. And so I truly believe this, that the longest journey sometimes is between our head and our heart. So as we let our staff know, okay, we're thinking about staff now. If we let our staff know more about our own sort of shabbiness, like our willingness to say, it's not all perfect inside here. You know, we were talking just before this about having imposter syndrome. If we're willing to let a little bit more of that out, then, and we invite others to, then what we're doing is we're inviting them to reveal more of themselves. If we kind of do the whole warts and all, that opens the door to creating closer connections, and it helps to keep people from expending so much energy trying to hide their insecurities. It really, especially for people that suffer, that have imposter syndrome, we spend so much energy trying to hide. And so this can really adjust that. And so here's one of the things that I want to encourage you and challenge you with. I want you to think about, how can we create an atmosphere where the staff feel that is safe to talk about the mistakes that they have made instead of trying to hide them. The biggest connection here is not to stop with just saying, oh, screwed up. It's to take it that step further. It's that conversation about, okay, well, what have you learned from that mistake? What have you learned? So what are we going to do with that? It's one thing to say I screwed up. It's another thing to go, yep, screwed up, and wander off. Wait a minute. What are we going to, do we need to repair whatever the mistake was? But even more importantly, what did we learn here? What did we learn here? And we have all these fancy business words, like we talk about this, and here's one that has always scared me. My boss at my previous location used to say, well, I think we should debrief. And I always went like, because I heard the word debrief as we're going to tell you all the ways you screwed up. It turns out that's not what they meant at all. But I already had a prior association with that particular word. And so for me, it was this concept of, did I do everything perfect? No. Did I do most things correctly or well? Yeah. Debriefing is both talking about all the things that went well as what were the mistakes that were made and what can we learn from those mistakes. And they didn't even have to be my mistakes, but what can we learn? It is much as it becomes safer and more acceptable to discuss the things that didn't work or the mistakes that we've made, it's going to become increasingly obvious that having the courage to make mistakes or fail is actually a prerequisite for doing the most important work. Think about that for half a second. Having the courage to make mistakes or having the courage to fail is actually a prerequisite for doing the most important work. And heart-centered leaders are going to help other people accept honest mistakes as an important part of a learning orientation to life. How many of us are busy preaching to our staff? We want to create a mistake zone in our classrooms for the children. We want the children to know it's okay to make mistakes. Are we doing the same for the grown-ups? Are we allowing that it's okay to make mistakes? Now, some mistakes may come with bigger consequences, right? You know, licensing violations, those have bigger consequences. Doing something else, maybe not as big of a consequence, and we can still learn. And if we break one of the licensing rules, what are we learning about that? What do we need to fix? What's not working well? So everyone knows that I have a thing with Brene Brown. I see Jody here. She knows, she's seen a lot of Brene Brown with me. I have a thing about Brene Brown. You know, they talk about who are the people that are at your table that advise you in your head. Brene Brown advises me in my head a lot. So I'm just going to give you this really quick clip, because this comes from her book, Daring Greatly. And in the resources, I give you some stuff out of Daring Greatly, but she's talking about the idea of making mistakes here. So I believe that I have shared the sound so that it should come through. Somebody give me a thumbs up as soon as I hit play if you can hear it.
Often the first question I get is, tell me about the title Daring Greatly. I mean, where does that come from? It sounds great, but what is it and what does it have to do with vulnerability? And for me, I'm so passionate about the title because truthfully, the whole concept and the whole idea behind Daring Greatly, I feel like really changed my life. I was in an incredibly difficult place. I was trying to show up in my work and put myself out there, and I was writing a lot and talking a lot about my research. And I felt like the more I did that, the more exposed I felt and the more afraid I felt, and the more I was constantly ducking and weaving criticism. And I came across this quote by Theodore Roosevelt. It's not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who's actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and blood and sweat, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes up short again and again, who at best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly. I know that there's a myth that vulnerability is weakness, but it's not. To show up, to let ourselves be seen, to try, to put ourselves out there when we're not sure if we're going to succeed, that's vulnerability, and that's daring greatly. And for me, this book is about what it takes to bust through the fear of not being enough, of not being perfect enough, of not being bulletproof enough, the fear of failing. You know, I used to have the question that used to guide my life is, what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? And since I wrote Daring Greatly, and since I came across this quote, my new question is, what's worth doing even if I fail? So thank you for your time. I hope you enjoy the book, and here's to Daring Greatly. I think we could use some more of it.
I love that switch up. Instead of what would you do if you didn't think you could fail, what is worth doing even if you fail? I think that adds a whole new level for us, because doing something when we knew we couldn't fail kind of opens the gates to I'd do anything. But now we're saying you might fail. So what's worth it? What's worth putting yourself out there? Oh, Mallory, you're reading the book? Awesome. One of the connections, one of the pieces I put on the resource list is I found a link to her reading several of the chapters. And so it's sort of like a audio book tease, but I put that on there so that people can listen to see how they feel about it, and to go into that. It doesn't tease me because I know I've read the book, but I love hearing her read it in her voice. Also, of course, I watch enough Brene Brown that when I read her book, I hear her, she narrates to me in my own head. Because I'm that important to you guys. She narrates to me in my head. So she brings up this reflection. Under what circumstances do you have the courage to fail? And why is the courage to fail valuable for our growth? I want you to think about that. Under what circumstances do you have the courage to fail? That can be a tough one, right? That's a hard one to think about. When am I willing to put myself out there and have the courage to fail? I also like to think about it from the perspective of there's no guarantee I'm going to fail, but there's no guarantee I'm not going to fail. So when am I going to be courageous? If I only have courage when I know that there's not that much at stake, is that really courageous? But the reality is, I truly personally believe when she talks about being bulletproof, I personally believe that that's a false thing. We believe ourselves to be bulletproof. Nobody's bulletproof. There's nobody bulletproof. And quite frankly, there's a lot more that we gain when we recognize that we're not bulletproof and we're willing to do it anyway. We're willing to step in, we're willing to step out. So all the things that I've said between last time and this time already, there's a couple of pieces of pushback that we get from people all the time. And I want to talk about those for just a second. So the first one is, there's not enough time to. I don't have enough time to. Have you said that? Have you thought it? Right? Well, I hate to say it this way to you, but the quote, it's not about having enough time, it's about making enough time. The reality is, if you've had time to fill in the blank, then you have time for this. Then you have time for this. So here's the other thing. Everybody thinks about this and this whole idea of being heart-centered and all of that. So here's what I'm going to ask you to do. And I'm going to turn on I'm going to get to my little timer. All right. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to think about a staff person. Okay, so start with that. Think of a staff person or coworker. Okay, think of something that might be heart-centered and endearing that you could say to that staff person. Just pick one person. This is going to get easier with practice and time. Okay, have you thought of something that you could say to somebody that's heart-centered and endearing? All right, everybody's muted. So I want you to bring them up in your mind. And I want you to say, when I say go, I want you to say whatever it is that you thought that you might say to them. Just practice it. Just say it out loud. Go. All right. So, do you want to know how long that took you between thinking and saying? 45 seconds. So, you don't have enough time? I think we can, right? It's going to be that idea of, again, it's that idea of getting in the habit and the practice of. It's the habit and it's the practice of. I was listening to a TED Talk actually just before this TED Talk, a woman by the name of Lovey Jones. And she calls, do you guys know who she is? Oh my gosh, Nikki, you do, yeah? She calls herself a professional troublemaker. And she's amazing. And I loved listening to her. I actually got there because Jamie sent me something else to listen to, and I was listening to that. And then on the side, it's like, if you like this, you might like that. And so I clicked on Lovey because I don't know, there's just something about the way that she was frozen on the screen that called to me. So I clicked on it. And she calls herself a troublemaker, a professional troublemaker. And she was talking about the idea of staying silent or not staying silent. And here were the three things that she said that we need to think about in our heads. The first thing is, are you telling the truth? The second thing is, do you mean it? And the third one is, can you say it with love? And she was talking about this as being both the positive things that we say to people, but the not positive things that we say to people. Are we telling the truth? Do we mean it? And can we say it with love? And when we start moving into this idea of being heart-centered, there has to be some authenticity here. So we have to make sure that we are telling the truth, meaning what we're saying, but also finding a way to say it with love. So here's the other piece of pushback that we get. Whoops. See the lovely lady with her finger in her ears? Isn't she great? I love that. I put her here to remind me of the sentiment, it won't work here. Or we tried that once. Right? We've heard that. So have you heard that? It won't work here, or we've tried that before. Have you thought it? Have you said it? And to that, I want to remind you of a Stephen Covey quote. And those of you that know me are not going to be surprised. This Stephen Covey quote says, focus on your circle of influence and what you have control over rather than the things you can't control. And anyone that knows me knows that I love a good circles of control activity. See, I even managed to get it in this workshop. I love a good circles of control. But when we're trying to do something like move into this heart-centered leadership and we're getting pushback from people and they're saying, well, that'll never work here, or I can't figure out, either the time or whatever. I want us to remember that. I'm going to focus narrowly on what I have control over, and I'll leave the rest to sort itself out for a bit. So moving on with Stephen Covey, there's this one. This is the famous half of the quote that people talk about all the time. We see the world not as it is, but how we are. I want to read you the rest of this quote. Or as we are conditioned to see it. When we open our mouths to describe what we see, we are in effect describing ourselves, our perceptions, our paradigms. So consider that for a minute. Then remember this: know yourself, know your strength, know your impact. And while I've woven many, many perspectives and information about heart-centered leadership into these two very brief sessions, as we get ready to wind down today, I want to focus on the last point that Nancy Rosno did in her article that she did on heart-centered leadership, because I think that we overlook this. And here's what I want to focus on. Celebrate often. That's part of this as well. We have to celebrate often. Heart-centered leaders know that they must set the tone you want in your program by focusing more on what's working well rather than on what's not working. So this quote is celebrate what you want to see more of. This is Tom Peters. He wrote 2 books. One is called In Search of Excellence, and the other is The Pursuit of Wow. And he talks a lot about this idea that if we spend all of our time and energy focusing on the things we don't want, guess what we get more of? Or guess what gets really loud and in our face? And that we need to celebrate what we want to see more of. So heart-centered leaders are great celebrators because they recognize that we can rejoice in the effort as much as the achievement. It's in the try, right? It's in the try. And the big things that I want you to notice, right? I'm going to give you some suggestions. Big things I want you to notice. Courage, kindness, commitment. Celebrate. What if we celebrated these 3 things, these qualities often? What if we celebrated these qualities with exuberance? Let's not wait for the big successes to plan a party. Remember that it's the loving energy that people bring is more important than any particular achievement. And I'm gonna parallel this. I'm gonna parallel this to the idea that we're spending all of this time trying to talk our staff about that it's about the process. It's not about the product, right? It's about the process. It's about the learning that happens along the way. It's not whether or not they got to a particular endpoint. We need to look at it that same way. We need to celebrate the process. And we need to recognize that that is more important than any particular achievement that can happen. More important than any of those. So organizations that are led by heart-centered leaders, organizations that are led by more heart-centered leaders become interdependent. They become mutually supportive and joyful. That doesn't mean that people don't work hard or that there aren't going to be bad days or that people won't get all up in their feelings or that we're not going to face challenges. We will. But what it does mean for us is that when those things happen, it's not going to break us. Because underneath that is a sense of purpose and pleasure that comes from having shared commitments to an important mission and important work. Now, one of the things we think about with this is this whole idea of, well, I have some people that I don't think they're not here for the passion. They're here for the job or they're here for the paycheck. Interestingly enough, we've found that in heart-centered leadership, it doesn't matter. Because quite frankly, we need people that are just here for the job because then they're going to do the job. We need people that are like, well, I don't know if I want to make this a career, but I'm going to be dang good at doing what I do between now and then. And I would also hazard a guess that the majority of you that are here didn't set out to do the job you're doing now. And many of you along the way maybe even thought, is this really what I want to do? Is this what I want to do? But the setting and the situation has so much more to do with it. It has so much more to do with it. So I've got a few minutes here. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to throw you into breakout rooms, just randomly throw you into breakout rooms. And while you're in there, I want you to talk about this. What is a practice or tradition that you could think about starting with your staff, or maybe you already do with your staff, that you think could create more of this culture or environment for you? How are you going to take those steps into heart-centered leadership? Maybe you want to focus on it being okay to make mistakes. Maybe that's what you're going to focus on. Maybe it's going to be noticing courage, kindness, and commitment. I don't know what it is. Think about which thing you think you can build in. And then I just want you to think about what is something that you can do and that you could start. All right. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to create some, breakout rooms. All right. And when you guys are pros, you know how this goes. When I open the room, you're going to get an invitation. And when you see the invitation, accept the invitation and zoom off to talk about some traditions and heart-centered leadership. And I promise I'll watch the clock and bring you back. All right. There you go. And you're off.